Sunday morning. I'm Jaden Jefferson, and welcome to this week's Community Focus. This morning I am joined by Ohio Secretary of State and now U.S. Senate candidate Frank LaRose. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jaden. Great to be back.
So it's been a while since we've talked, and since we've talked, you've made a big announcement. You're running for U.S. Senate. So why?
That's correct. Yeah, 2 weeks ago I announced that I'm running for U.S. Senate. I think that the primary reason is I'm profoundly concerned about the direction that our state and our nation is taking. I think that the economy under the current administration is hurting Ohio families when the cost of everything is going up, but wages are staying stagnant. And unfortunately, the crew in Washington thinks that you fix that by hiring 80,000 new IRS agents and spending trillions of dollars that we don't have. I think that the solution is unleashing the greatest engine of human prosperity that's ever existed, and that's the free market. And you do that by cutting taxes and streamlining regulations. And yes, investing in crucial things like infrastructure and public safety. But it also means that you take advantage of the great natural resources that our country has. And that includes our oil and gas resources right here in Ohio. In fact, I'm joining you from Eastern Ohio right now, which is the epicenter of so much of that opportunity and prosperity if we're just willing to use it. I think that there's great concerns about the security situation on the U.S.-Mexican border. For me, that's something I've experienced firsthand. I served as a member of a counter-narcotics task force down there years ago. And so I saw the humanitarian crisis, the dual crisis where it's both humanitarian but also public safety. And then I think also as a parent, I'm concerned. I'm the only candidate in this race who has 3 school-age children. And I'm telling you that Lauren and I don't want to co-parent with the government or anybody else. We want to raise our children with our values. And I think a lot of Ohioans feel that way as well. And so we've got a challenge to face. We've got a number of challenges to face. And it starts by defeating Sherrod Brown and actually putting somebody in the U.S. Senate who shares our values. I'm the battle-tested conservative that can do just that. And I plan to beat him next November.
Obviously, being a Senate candidate, that can consume a lot of time. And then you also have the election happening right now. So how exactly are you balancing the two?
Well, this is sort of a classic question of leadership and how do you make sure that you can get the maximum use of your time? Of course, I spend my off-duty time right now campaigning for issue 1. After August 8th, I'll be spending a lot of that off-duty time campaigning for the U.S. Senate. But of course, my first priority is being a dad and a husband. But my first priority professionally is the work that I do as Ohio Secretary of State. And so to that end, the great thing is I can do a lot of that work on the road via Zoom conference and that kind of thing, and then spend a lot of time in the office. And also we've built a first-class team at the Secretary of State's office that keeps me apprised of what's going on. I hold them accountable to make sure that they maintain the high standards that I have for elections administration here in the state of Ohio.
And let's go ahead and talk about this special election. Early voting turnout has been up there. So what does that indicate to you about Ohio voters?
I think it indicates that Ohio voters trust the early voting process. I don't draw other conclusions from it. I think that it's everybody's sort of favorite parlor game this time of year when there's an election going on to look at the early voting numbers and try to divine from that some sort of a conclusion about whether the race is heading this way or heading that. I don't draw those kind of conclusions, but I do say that Ohioans know that early voting is a great way to make your voice heard, whether you choose early voting as an absentee voter or whether you choose to go and vote early at the Board of Elections. They're great, convenient, and secure ways to make your voice heard. And Ohioans are showing that. They're demonstrating that with high levels of participation, and that's a good thing.
Now, I talked with Lucas County Board of Elections Director LaVera Scott recently about early voting and just about some of the general things when it comes to these elections. But every election, it seems, we're starting to have more confusion when it comes to going to the polls because maybe people aren't aware of the issues or maybe there's just confusion about voting in general. So how are you going to make it easier for people to vote? Because there definitely is that confusion there.
Yeah, and I think that there's always some level of public information work to do. I think that we've been able to reduce confusion, thankfully, because our office has been really proactive about getting accurate information out. It means on our own social media platforms. It means on our website. It means by working with reporters like yourself. It also means through the mailings and newspaper ads and those kind of things that our office does and that the county boards of election does. But here are a couple of things that all Ohioans should know. And that is that Ohio requires a photo ID when you go to vote. That's a change that was made a year ago. And that's not going to change for most people how they vote because 98% of voters already bring a photo ID or driver's license when they come to vote. There has historically been a small number that used those alternative documents that you used to be allowed to use in the past, but now it's a state ID or driver's license, a passport, I think a military ID. You can check voteohio.gov for the exhaustive list of that. But it also means making sure that people know all the options available to them. Ohio is clearly a leader in the nation with the convenience of voting, with 4 weeks of early voting. Most states have nothing close to that. We have weekend hours and evening hours. Most states do not have that. We have Sunday early voting in Ohio. And as you know, a lot of faith communities have organized things that they call souls to the polls, where people go to worship on Sunday morning and then they can go vote after that. There's only 6 states in the entire country that allow Sunday early voting, and we're one of them. So early voting is great. And again, voteohio.gov is where you can get all the information. Absentee voting is another way in Ohio where you can vote from the comfort of your own home. You can vote from your own kitchen table. And in Ohio, you can track your ballot at voteohio.gov/track. You can make sure you know when it's going to arrive at your home and when it goes back to the Board of Elections. And so absentee voting is another great way. And then, of course, if you wait until Tuesday, August 8th, you can vote in person at your polling location from 6:30 a.m. until 7:30 p.m. So a lot of convenient options. There is false information out there about election integrity all the time. And so it's important that people go to the trusted source, get your information from the trusted official government website, voteohio.gov.
One thing I love about this show is that we can quickly switch gears. And I'd say there are 2 things going on at once here. And obviously you're also running for Senate. So let's talk policies. What would you say are some proposals that you have if you're elected to the U.S. Senate?
So, Jaden, my focus has really always been throughout my time in the state Senate and now as Secretary of State, how do we unleash the engine of human prosperity, which is free market capitalism? How do we help Ohio businesses thrive so they can put Ohioans to work so that families can prosper? And to me, it's a pretty simple matter of getting government out of the way so that the private sector can do what they do best. That means cutting taxes, streamlining regulations. And it also means investing in the things that government needs to invest in, but doing those efficiently. And I'm talking about public safety and infrastructure, public education and national defense, all those things that government needs to do. It needs to do them in a way where there's a clear return on investment. There's another thing that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I would get the chance to do as a new member of the U.S. Senate, and that is help pass a bill called the REINS Act. The REINS Act is simply an idea that will pull back the reins. That's one of the reasons why it's called that, on government bureaucrats that put in place rules and regulations that businesses and individuals have to operate by that just gum up the works and create a bunch of red tape. It's time that we slash regulations so that we can unleash human prosperity through the free market. Something else that I would have, I think, a unique perspective on, Jaden, is I'd be the first Green Beret in U.S. Senate history. In fact, the first member of the Special Operations Command in general, and I serve as a reservist still, but my background is as an Army Green Beret. I understand the important work of keeping our nation secure and standing with our allies around the world and really what that takes. And as we see great power competition with a rising China, I think that could define the next 100 years of American existence. And it's important that we stand up to that, but we do it in a smart and strategic way, that we focus on things like critical minerals. A lot of people haven't thought about this, but you really can't build electronic devices these days unless you're willing to do business with the Chinese Communist Party, because they control these mineral mines in mostly Africa, but also parts of Asia that you need in order to build electronic components. This administration has been asleep at the switch on things like that, and we need to engage in those kind of things. And then here's something else that I don't think you're going to hear a lot of others talk about, because maybe it's not popular to talk about, but our national debt is unsustainable. We have a $32 trillion national debt. Jaden, we were just talking about, you're 15, I'm 44, a couple years older. But for those of us that are going to be earning our living for many decades to come, this debt that has been piling up is going to be passed on to us and also our children. A $32 trillion national debt. If you think about what $1 trillion is, it's 1,000 billion. That's $32,000 billion in national debt. And it is a huge problem that is going to impact our nation for a long time to come. Think about it just this way. Within the next 3 years, just the interest payment on the debt, when you borrow money, you got to pay interest, right? Just the interest payment on that debt will be more than we spend on the entire defense of our nation. Every aspect of the Defense Department and all of the work that we do to defend our country will be dwarfed by interest payments alone. That's unsustainable. Both parties are to blame. They've been spending too much money. Republicans and Democrats have been spending too much money. And I will go to Washington and do something about that by getting spending under control.
And I will say that's an interesting dinner table topic of discussion if you get the chance to, because the national debt truly is astonishing. And one other thing that you said at the beginning of the interview was you feel that Senator Sherrod Brown isn't doing what he should be doing to help Ohioans. So what would be some of those things that you say he's not doing that you would do?
His values don't reflect Ohio's values. He is a guy who has been in public office for 48 years. That's 4 years longer than I've been alive, and has consistently had a voting record that would make sense if he was the senator for California or New York. When I talk to my friends who are Democrats here in Ohio, when you talk about his voting record, they say, wow, that's too far left for me. And so for Ohio to be sending what is objectively one of the most liberal members of the Senate to represent them just doesn't make sense. He's been focused on the wrong thing. His work as Senate banking chairman is just one example of that. You know, he's been trying to penalize small local banks for doing what they are supposed to do, and that's making access to capital available to business owners that want to borrow, that want to live their American dream. He's been incredibly cumbersome in his policymaking toward the banking industry. But also, this is another one, he supported this idea of hiring 80,000 new IRS agents. I called him out for it, and I said, Senator Brown, that's going to hurt small businesses. Well, his response was, oh, no, LaRose doesn't know what he's talking about. We told those new IRS agents, 80,000 new IRS agents, that they can only go after the rich. Well, how do you define rich? Well, it means people that make over a few $100,000 a year, he defines as rich. But what he's missing is the difference between gross and net, because a lot of farmers, they make over several $100,000 a year, but it doesn't go in their pocket. That's not take-home pay for them. That's money that goes into fertilizer and new tractors and diesel fuel and seeds. People that own a small machine shop, they may make over a few $100,000 a year, but it goes into new machine tools and employees and new machines for their shop. And so those are the kind of policies that Senator Brown has put in place that are hurting Ohio small business owners and hurting Ohio workers, the people that he claims that he's helping.
One thing you did recently that actually gained a lot of attention, especially on social media, was that you endorsed former President Trump on Twitter. So, respectfully, did he need your endorsement? Because he's polling pretty well nationally.
I don't think he needs my endorsement, but I'm proud to give it to him. Listen, I've got a style that's different from him. I even said that in my release. I don't talk the way he talks or act the way he acts. He does, and you know that's his style, a style that's unique to him. But I will say this: as president, the nation was safer, stronger, and more prosperous. And I believe that when he's in the White House again in 2025, the nation will be safer, stronger, and more prosperous again. I think that he's a decisive leader who knows how to get things done for our country. And I think he's going to make a great president again for America. And that's why I'm proud to endorse him. And I think that a lot of Ohioans share that opinion.
Even after multiple indictments.
Listen, everybody gets a day in court. And thankfully, our country believes in innocent until proven guilty. I will say this, though. It does seem to many of us like there's a political motivation behind much of this when others have done similar things and not faced nearly the same consequences. It's not lost on most Ohioans that the Justice Department reports to President Biden and they're going after his chief opponent in the presidential election. That's disappointing, and that's not what America should do. Of course, again, nobody's above the law, but it certainly seems like this has a political motivation behind it by the Biden administration.
And one thing that obviously Republicans nationally are facing in terms of challenges is that there are many in Republican parties right now that are concerned about former president and what his actions are going to reflect on the party. So is that a concern for you?
Well, Jaden, that's the great thing about elections is that, listen, as a conservative, we believe in competition. Competition makes you stronger on the athletic field and in the free market and also in politics. And so I'm giving my endorsement based on what I think is best for Ohio, but it will be up to millions of Ohioans, tens of millions of Americans who show up and vote over the next year in a Republican primary to decide who our party's standard bearer will be. I believe that President Trump will get that nod. But that'll be ultimately up to the primary voters, my fellow Republicans throughout the country.
And if you had
I'm gonna have to go after that. I got some folks waiting for me here in Columbia County.
Well, good timing, because my final question for you here is, what would be your final pitch for Ohio voters? Because I know you have a busy schedule, so I don't know when I'm going to be able to get you back on the show, but what would be your final pitch to voters?
Well, for the U.S. Senate campaign, my pitch would be it's time that we have somebody who's both a father and a fighter. I'm the only candidate in the race who has school-age children, and I'm the only candidate in the race who's a military veteran, a combat veteran at that. And I think that that matters to a lot of Ohioans, somebody that has proven that they can fight for a cause and win. I also think that in the Republican primary, Ohio Republicans are looking for a battle-tested conservative. I'm the only one in the race with a 100% pro-life voting record. I'm the only one in the race with a 100% pro-gun voting record. And I'm the only candidate in this Republican primary who has a clear track record on cutting taxes, not raising them. The other candidates will have to answer for their record. I'm the one that has voted to cut taxes and never to raise them. And I'm also the only lifelong Republican. It's interesting to me in a three-way Republican primary that two of the other candidates have both been Democrats in the past, not me. I'm a lifelong Republican, and that's why I think that my fellow Republicans will give me their support for this U.S. Senate race and make me their standard bearer to go take on Sherrod Brown and to beat him in 2024.
Well, Ohio Secretary of State and U.S. Senate candidate Frank LaRose, thanks for joining me as we return back to our roots in a car.
Thanks, Jaden. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, and that's this week's Community Focus. Have a great week.